Hi, I'm Larry Mike Erinda, and welcome to this edition of Profiles. And with us, a special guest today, and we're very, very happy to have him on, Mr. Civello from Suffolk County PBA President. And we have so many things to talk about. But first, Lou, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, of course, and thank you for having me on, Larry. It's an honor to be here. So I'm the president of the Suffolk County Police Benevolent Association. So we are the union that represents Suffolk County police officers. I've been a police officer myself for 26 years, serving the people here in Suffolk. Before that, just a little bit of time over in the NYPD. Went to college at Queens College, grew up in Queens. When I was fortunate enough to get the job out here, I moved out to Selden and been out in Selden for about 22 years now. I live there with my lovely wife and our 2 boys.
What made you become PBA President? Did they come and recruit you? Did you offer your help?
Sure. Well, it all started with being a police officer. Always wanted to be a police officer. I had cousins that were both NYPD police officers. Grew up watching them, hearing their stories.
Blue Bloods, huh?
Blue Blood, yeah, absolutely. It's been in my blood since I was a child, and that was always my vocation and what I wanted to do. And then, for years of doing that, I really started to see what the union does and how it doesn't, and how it actually fights for its police officers and fights for the public as well and for public safety. And that really was something that I wanted to get involved in. So got involved just going to union meetings, became a delegate at one point, and then it sort of rose through the ranks all the way up to the presidency here.
Oh, that's fantastic. Now, Lou, I know a lot of things have been happening, and recruitment is sometimes a problem with not just our police department, but with the other ones, Nassau County and other ones in the state. Now, the main reason seems to be the retirement plans. Now, we have this, most people don't know it, Tier 5 and Tier 6 is a New York State retirement plan, and basically you put money into it and then you retire, it's there for you. But some of these plans are, they're maybe a glorified 401k. Now, what's the PBA stance on some of this?
Right. Well, our state is in a very dangerous place in terms of recruitment of new public servants. So, and it's not just police officers, it's public safety, it's municipal workers, it's our teachers, it's our firemen, it's the people that are cleaning the county buildings, our CPS, the people that make this state run. It used to be that there was a contract and a commitment between the state and the people that serve it. So the promise was this, that if you serve your community, you give 30, 40 years of dedication of your life, of sometimes, like in the case of police officers, of risking your life. In return, you would get a little piece of that American dream. You would get a fair retirement. Now, that promise has been reneged upon. They have slashed and cut that promise, that pension, to the bone at this point, to the point where our new police officers, our new public servants are really being cheated. They're getting less than every generation that came before them. And it's evident in that people no longer want these jobs. I'll tell you, in the case of Suffolk County Police, and then Suffolk County Police, for a very long time has been the gold standard of policing. It's the job that everybody had always wanted. Now, our test, our last test, has dropped, by about 2/3. The people that are taking, the applicants that are taking that test. So back in the 90s, we'd get about 40,000 people to take our test, and the last test that we gave, we had just a little over 13,000. So a staggering drop in interest of people that want that job, and that's police. So we're sort of at the top. As you move further down that line, to every other public servant, to our corrections officers, our probation officers, deputy sheriffs. Like I said, the guys sweeping up the county buildings, the people plowing the roads for the town. Some of these are not high-paying jobs. The interest has waned even more, to the point where they cannot hire. Our probation officers burned through lists where they had to actually give out new tests early because they burned through the entire list and could not find people willing to take the job. That's due in no small part to what they have done with this pension system. And Larry, this all started, during the financial crisis. We had the mortgage crisis and the downturn in the economy, and the message from the politicians was, well, you have to tighten your belt. Everything is coming apart, but don't worry. We're going to fix it down the road. And that was...
Kick the can down the road.
Absolutely. What you always hear from them. And just like everything else, once they take something away, they never give it back. The banks got bailouts. Wall Street got payouts, right? And the public sector workers got the shaft. We're still holding the bag. You know, that new generation of police officers, public servants, teachers, firemen, like I said, across the board, they are being cheated. And that needs to change, because if it doesn't change, you know, not only are you going to start to get a lower quality of candidate, you're not going to get candidates at all. What you're competing with in the private sector right now is people that work from home, right? That's the reality of 2026.
Right.
You know, people take jobs and they don't expect to come to the office 5 days a week. You know, they're working 2-3 days a week, and the rest, you know, they're sitting at home behind a computer. As a police officer, as a corrections officer, you do not ever have that luxury. You're never going to work from home. That's the competitive job market now, and it's no, you know, there's no hard way to think about this, about why people are shying away from these jobs and looking for other avenues of opportunity.
And not just that, but we also have that the detectives and current police officers that want to retire, they're actually being asked to stay because they don't have that many people around. It's
Right.
the same thing
Yeah.
they did with the judges. Judges, if you hit 70
Right.
before, that was it. They got rid of it. Now they extended it because they can't get the people in. And one of the ways to do this would be to sweeten the pot for the retirement package. And you guys also just, I believe you held a rally about this, right?
We did. We had a very large rally, Tier 5 and Tier 6 rally, to demand changes to this and to really alert the public to what we're dealing with and where we're headed. And it was very, very well attended. We had support from not even just public sector workers, but also private sector. You know, we had the trade unions were there attended, even though they don't really have a dog in the fight. We had elected officials from both parties that came together because they recognize how dire this is and that we're headed off a cliff here. And even the state comptroller himself, who was the steward of that pension, he showed up, he spoke, and he recognizes the need to change this.
Right. Because, like I said, you know, the competition that's out there, you know, back then in the 80s and 90s, the prestige that came with it was a good package for most people. And, you know, there was a camaraderie there, too, that, you know, being part of something bigger than yourself. Right. You know, with the police department, the fire department. But the fire departments are having the same problem, too, with volunteers and everything else like that. But now, what do you think, what are some of the major issues that the Suffolk County Police Department officers are facing?
So, I mean, there are other reasons for the recruitment and retention problems. You know, I think the pension system is a major one, but there are certainly others. I think these jobs are harder than ever before. You know, it used to be that police officers, you know, law enforcement officers were hailed as heroes. It's an honorable profession, a well-respected profession. And over the last, I don't know, you know, 5 to 10 years, we've been villainized, you know, largely by the media, largely a false narrative where, you know, we were accused or we had a bad apple or two, and that was somehow, you know, all police officers are bad.
Right.
And that has made the job very, very difficult. You know, it also is more accountable than ever before. You know, name another profession where every single thing you do is on camera. And there's always going to be someone, you know, sitting at home Monday morning quarterbacking you, second guessing your every single decision. And some of those decisions are life and death, right? Where we're making split-second decisions that are really going to decide whether or not you live or die, or maybe someone else lives or dies. And that is constantly under scrutiny, constantly under question. There's constantly police officers are made into second-class citizens, in my opinion. Right. You know, right now we have a whole separate tier of justice for police officers, where instead of being looked at by the local DA, the person that the people elected in the place where you work and live, you're looked at by the state AG because, you know, in most cases that state AG is more hostile towards police officers. So, you know, you have this whole second-class tier of citizens in terms of police officers and how we're treated by the justice system.
And also, it's a duplication of services. It's really not necessary. But once again, New York State loves bloat. They love to, you know, keep making the bureaucracy bigger and bigger and making it worse for people. Instead of cutting, you know, there's no need. We have a great DA. He solved the Gilgo murder cases that nobody was able to solve for years. I mean, and, you know, to have that passed off onto a state AG who is not just covering Suffolk County and Nassau, she's covering the entire state.
Right.
You know, some of these officers may have to wait, you know, to get a response or,
Right.
or something like that, and that's just not fair. Just
It's not fair, and I think, you know, maybe some of your viewers might not realize how political the position of DA can be. And to his credit, DA Tierney is not political. This is a guy who very even-handedly goes about his job and hands out justice. That's not always the case. You know, there's an old saying that you can indict a ham sandwich, right? Or you cannot indict. Like if you look at the case of Alvin Bragg in Manhattan, where you have hardened criminals, people who are committing very heinous crimes that aren't indicted and don't face any sort of penalty, any sort of accountability for their actions. By the same token, if you're an activist DA, if you're a political DA, if you're what we essentially have in you know, the state AG, you can go after whoever you want. And if you haven't been paying attention for the last years, the system gets weaponized quite often, right? We've seen that lawfare, and that lawfare is quite often used against police officers. There's a case right now out of the Bronx with Sergeant Eric Duran, was defending, you know, the lives of his police officers, and unfortunately, the drug dealer chose to run from the police, chose to ride a motor vehicle. You know, he's on a motorcycle, motor scooter on a sidewalk towards these police officers. Sergeant Duran made a split-second decision, and tragically, this person lost their life when he picked up a cooler and used it to try to prevent him from moving forward. And just an absolute injustice to that sergeant because of this drug dealer who had, you know, there is no culpability in his own death. The culpability is all on that of the police officer. You know, he's going to be doing prison time for that split-second decision that he made. That's unfortunate. That's an example of the system being weaponized against police officers. We are not getting a fair shake, and that's a statewide system. Again, so it's not just because it's the Bronx. You know, again, this is the state AG that has purview over these things, and if you want to make your political career on prosecuting a police officer because that is what the radical left wants, well, this is how you go about and do it. You know, ultimately you have police officers are being sacrificed on the altar of radical leftism, and that is dangerous for everyone that lives and works in this state and needs to come to an end.
Yeah, and it's gotten to a point where Mr. and Mrs. John Q. Public actually have more clout than a police officer when it comes down to courts and stuff like that. They actually are looked upon with more rights than the officer has. The officer is out to serve and protect. They're there to protect you. And by cutting them off like that, again, you expect to come out and say, hey, why don't you join the police force? And people are like, no, that's okay, I'm trying to quit.
Yeah.
You know, it's crazy.
Well, I would go one step further and say even beyond the regular person having more rights than a police officer, if you're a hardened criminal, if you're a thug, if you're a gang member, you have more rights than a police officer. And you can look at a simple law, the 50A law, versus the clean slate law. So the 50A law says that anything you do as a police officer, if someone accuses you of kidnapping them and then beaming them up to aliens, that stays on your record forever. And a defense attorney can question you about it. But clean slate, you know, you could commit a felony and have that wiped away as a criminal under New York state law. So the police officer, we have a set of rules where we're going to hold you accountable for bogus, false complaints forever. And in the case of a criminal, we're going to take what you actually did, what you got convicted for by a jury, right, a violent crime, and that we're going to wipe away and give you a clean slate. So you actually have criminals that have more rights than the police officers in this state.
Yeah, and it's horrible. And the other thing that brings up, we had talking to it right before the show, is this bail reform. Now, bail reform originally was supposed to be if somebody was caught stealing some bread or something small. It wasn't a serious crime like murder, drug dealing, and stuff like that, that they would just go in, even a cop killer, and then they're on the street 2 hours later. It's absolutely ridiculous, and this has got to get fixed.
It does, and it goes to the old saying, right? The road to hell is paved in good intentions. So the intention of the amount of justice you get shouldn't correlate with the amount of money in your wallet. You know, that's a good intention, right? And if that's what bail reform was about, that makes sense. That is not what you have here in this state. What you have is an absolute disaster for public safety. It's a disaster for our police officers. It's a disaster for everyone that lives here. And let me give you a few examples of that right here in Suffolk County, right? Just recently, we had two individuals, right? Some great police work where they're stopped, police officer sees a suspicious car, pulls them over, something isn't right, starts doing some questioning, and then finds a tank of gasoline and 2 Molotov cocktails in the trunk, right? So what are you going to do with a Molotov cocktail? There's only one thing to do with a Molotov cocktail, and it's what they were going to do. They were going to burn down a home, right? They were going to burn. They had a dispute with someone over some automotive work, and they did the next logical thing when you're not happy with something like that. They're going to burn down his house. You know, literally the weapons of terror, right? But these individuals couldn't be held onto. They had to be let go because of bail reform here in New York State. Insane, insane. And policing is a dangerous job. When you pull somebody over, right, when you pull people over that are willing to burn a home down, trust me, they are willing to fight with the police. They are willing to hurt the police. So you are risking your very safety when you pull over a criminal like this and you get them off the street, and then what does New York State do? Simply lets them go. That's the state of our law here, and that's not even the most egregious case. The most egregious case we had here in Suffolk County is one of a dismembered body. We had a body, right, that was dismembered. We knew who dismembered it, and we had enough probable cause that they did it, that we could lock them up. They dropped the body in a park where children found it. We locked them up for dismembering the body. And again, because of the state of the laws here, the DA could not hold them. Could not hold them. You can't even ask for bail in these cases, right? So the DA's hands are tied from even asking the judge to say, hey, maybe the people here that dismembered this body, maybe you want to give us a little more time to look into this and see maybe if we should charge them with murder and gather evidence. You know, instead, we're forced to let them walk. And that sounds absurd. It sounds insane. It sounds like something you couldn't even see in a Hollywood movie, but that is reality here in New York State under bail reform.
And these judges are ordered by the state to do this, to act this way, to do certain ways.
Right.
Excuse me, in the courtroom.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, one of the things were that, and a big proponents of the bail reform, want to reform bail reform, is leave it up to the judge.
Right.
We have some great judges
Right.
here in Suffolk County. They're fair, they're just. Okay. Let them make the call. They're in criminal court every day. They see this. They know who's the bad guy and who's
Mm-hmm.
the good guy. You know, but no, they're forced by this mandate from the state that they have to act a certain way on a certain trial. It's just ridiculous.
It really is. And this is, you know, you're speaking about judicial discretion, which is something they need to restore. So you have one branch of government infringing upon another, right? That's the crux of the problem. You have the legislature, right, who are not experts in this, right? This is why we have a judicial branch, and their job is to judge. We need to let them exercise their judgment. The way they crafted this law was exactly backwards.
Right.
So they said, what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of all bail out of the gate, and then we'll pick a few really heinous crimes, and we'll say in those cases, like murder one, well, in those you can have bail. Instead of taking the opposite approach and saying, hey, here's the very minor crimes that we don't think you should be able to have bail for. And the problem with doing it the way I described in the beginning, which is the way they did it, is that you inevitably miss something. Like they missed the law about dismembering bodies, right? They missed the law about Molotov cocktails. And that's going to happen because there are any number of things, right, that can occur. This is not an exact science. Policing is not an exact science. You're never going to be able to envision every single scenario that you're going to find out there in the street. And that's why you need to take a fact pattern and put it before the judge and say, Your Honor, this is what occurred. They dismembered a body. You know, we believe that you should hold them. And then the judge can make that decision, right? That's the only rational way to do this. But we are not rational in this state.
Right. And as far as loopholes, we're saying, you know, this is Swiss cheese. I mean, every single thing is a loophole. Now, if you think, and let's say if we go back and this law was in effect years ago, you see Jeffrey Dahmer out on the street, you see Charles Manson out on the street, the son of Sam. I mean, all these murderers. It would just be total chaos. And this is going to be what is going to be happening in the future if something is not corrected or our state doesn't do something.
Right. And you know, it goes back to the broken windows theory and the importance of enforcing small crimes and enforcing quality of life crimes. You know, you mentioned the son of Sam, right? That started with a parking ticket, them catching him. So when you start to dismiss all the small stuff and when you say, oh, it doesn't really matter, it's only jumping a turnstile, it's only a minor theft that you're doing. Well, when you do that minor theft for the 80th time, right? There might be a bigger problem with you, and perhaps you're willing to do more crimes, more, and that is the case. It's a small amount of the population that commits the majority of the crimes. It's that recidivism, and we start ignoring the small stuff, it festers. It's like ignoring the small stuff at home, right? What happens? Inevitably, you're going to have bigger problems. And that is the problem with the state of the law here in New York State and the state of bail reform. And again, we're not advocating that if somebody steals a loaf of bread to feed their family, we should put them in prison forever.
Right.
Not what we're advocating for. We're just advocating for some rational middle ground, and
Exactly.
we don't have that.
And that it should really, again, goes back to what judges do. It should be left the judge's decision. The state should stay the hell out of it. All right, the judge, you decide. You don't have to. They don't have to have bail. Okay, they're a poor person, or they got caught stealing, something like that. But the majority of these people, and we were talking before, they all have records. This is like the guy with who was pulled over on the LIE, and he had 43 outstanding tickets.
Sure.
And he was back on the road in 2 hours.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just the insane logic of what's going on. And I think the state has finally got hit in the head enough times to say, gee, I think there might be a problem here.
Right.
They're going to start working on it. And that's why it's very important this election year that, the people that we're going to put into the state are going to be fighting for this.
Right.
Yeah,
and that's one thing that we do quite a bit on. So we are very politically active as a union. It's one thing I say to all my police officers. If you want to keep the Suffolk County safe, if you want to keep your job as good as it is, well, then you need to be involved politically. You need to vote first and foremost, but you need to also vote in an educated way.
Right.
So you need to know how these politicians vote, right? How they vote on these laws, what laws they pass, what they stand for,
affect the department.
and how it's going to affect the department, how it's going to affect your family, how it's going to affect our county. Those are very important things. And unfortunately, most of us are too busy working our jobs and trying to feed our families that we sort of don't have the time to do these things. But if you don't, you do so at your own peril. Because if you let it go down the road that it's going, you're going to have Suffolk County destroyed. And there's a reason that people move out of the city. Not a whole lot of people moving from Suffolk County to the Bronx, right?
Exactly.
A lot of people moving from the Bronx to Suffolk County.
Exactly.
And that's because of the job we do out here, and because, I do believe that the elected officials care about public safety here in Suffolk County. And if you want to keep it that way, make sure you're voting not only in your local elections, but also in those state elections, because it has a great effect on us.
Yes.
You need to hold those who pass reckless laws accountable. Because I tell you who is voting and who is making a lot of noise, and that's those radical activists, right?
Right.
They have this vision of whatever it is, socialism in New York City, of a place where we can defund the police and not have police officers and have social workers do our jobs. This is a dangerous, dangerous pipe dream that they have, and it's going to end in calamity. So you need to combat that. You need to be engaged. You need to vote, and you need to make sure that you're out there voting for your family and the place that we live.
And God bless most of the Suffolk County police officers for the job they do. And a lot of them get active in the community. The Police Athletic League is a great thing. We have the COPE units, community-oriented police enforcement. They know the committees, the community. They know the areas, and they know, like, most of the people. When you're in a patrol car, you're patrolling the same area, you see the same people over and over again, and that's the flavor of Suffolk County. We feel safe here. I would not feel safe in Brooklyn, any part of New York City. Okay,
Yeah.
even some parts of upstate, I wouldn't feel safe in. All right, and we want to keep that.
Right.
People want to be safe. I don't see people saying, hey, we're all for the criminal and the hell with the cops. It's like a backwards world. It's unbelievable.
Right, and I will say, and being a former NYPD police officer myself, the NYPD does a tremendous job. The problem is that the elected officials there, by and large, don't have their back. They don't let them do their job. In fact, they pass laws to prevent them from doing their job. That diaphragm law that said if you get attacked by a violent thug as a police officer and you wrestle around and end up on top of the criminal, and that criminal's chest is compressed at all, as the police officer, regardless of what the criminal did, you're going to jail, right? That's an actual law in New York City. So, they have their hands tied. The police officers are literally handcuffed themselves. We don't have that here in Suffolk County. We are allowed to enforce the law. And one of the things that sets us apart, I think, is the fact that, most of us not only work here, we live here. We raise our families here. We care about this community a great deal. And because of that, we have a vested interest in public safety here. And it's something we're not only people policing the streets. We are the people coaching the Little League teams. We are volunteering in the ambulance crews.
Talking to the business owners.
Right. We're out there walking a beat. Many times I walked in Civello for many years and would go and talk to the Chamber of Commerce. We'd go and talk to the individual business, and they loved seeing that beat police officer. They loved you coming in, saying hello, asking what the issues are, what are the problems, what can I do to help. That's the sort of community policing you get here in Suffolk County. It's that coffee with a cop. Yep. We're in the schools the same way. Yep. Making sure that kids get that experience of not thinking of the police officer as a bad guy or something to be afraid of. Interacting with the police officer. This is someone that can help you. This is someone to be looked up to. So in Suffolk County, that is what you get. And law enforcement, everybody loves to, see the police out there doing their job and everything. A lot of people, there was the old saying back in the 40s and 50s, where's a cop when you need one, right? But our guys are out there. I see them constantly when Route 25, Mount Sinai Coram Road, the North Ocean Avenue, 112. They're out there. Yeah, and that's that omnipresence. We try to be everywhere and everywhere that we're needed, and we're out there. That's our mobile office. Right. So everything we do is in that car. Sometimes you'll see those police cars pulled up next to each other, and they're not just having a cup of coffee. They are maybe meeting with the sergeant. They're doing their paperwork. They're discussing where the problem areas are in the neighborhoods that they patrol. Or I just pulled this guy over, keep an eye out if he's in your district or something like that. Correct. Yeah, sharing information. Right. So it's that important part. Even we'll stop and use the bathroom at a firehouse because we're out on the road. It's not like there are little police stations everywhere, and we're very geographically spread out. So whereas in the city you have one precinct, small geographical area, here, we go all the way from one end of the county to the other. Right. Right. You're out in Mountaville. You got a lot of real estate to police. So you sort of have to make do wherever you can. But that also lends to that community where you're getting to know your local fire district. You're getting to know your local store owner when you may stop in and try to use the restroom there or say hello to the owner. Right. It comes back. You are part of this community at every level. Yeah, and we're just getting ready to wrap up here, but just quickly for everybody to know that when you defund the police, we just had a major snowstorm, okay? We haven't seen it in quite a while. The police were out there helping these stranded motorists and doing all these other things. And it's not just we're arresting criminals. The emergency services, there's so many things, domestic disputes like we were talking about before, that the officers do. And so defunding police, very bad idea. Right. Definitely a bad idea. Insane idea, right? Exactly. I mean, that you're talking about something where you could have absolute disaster if you were to take away the police. You would have chaos, you would have anarchy. But you're exactly right. It's not just that. It's not just arresting the violent criminals. During this latest snowstorm, I had members. We had somebody having a heart attack, and they were elderly. We had 2 feet of snow, right, 2 feet plus, and their whole walkway unshoveled. You couldn't get to them. Those police officers took snow shovels, shoveled the driveway in order to get this individual and give them medical aid. So that's the sort of things that we're doing here in Suffolk County. It goes a lot further than just arresting a bad guy. Well, Lou, I wanted to thank you my pleasure. Show. It's been great, and we hope to have you again in the future. Let us know what's going on with the PBA. Oh, I'd love to come back. Thank you. Until next time, I'm Larry Mike Render for Profiles. We'll see you right back here on this channel. Take care.